When I was 17, I thought I was losing my mind. The panic attacks started without warning, heart racing, vision blurring, feeling like the walls were closing in. But when I finally worked up the courage to tell my father what was happening, he looked me dead in the eye and said three words that shattered me. Stop attention seeking. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. What happened next with my therapist 2 months later would change everything I thought I knew about myself, my family, and what it really means to survive. It started on a Tuesday in October. I remember because it was the day before my AP chemistry test and I'd been studying for weeks. I was sitting in third period when suddenly my chest felt like someone was squeezing it in a vise. My vision started tunneling and I couldn't catch my breath. The fluorescent lights above seemed to pulse and flicker, even though I knew they weren't actually moving. Mrs. Patterson was explaining something about molecular bonds when I shot up from my desk so fast my chair scraped against the floor. 28 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me. I mumbled something about the bathroom and bolted from the room, my sneakers squeaking against the polished hallway tiles. In the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection. My skin looked pale and clammy, my pupils were dilated, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I had no idea what was happening to me, but I knew it wasn't normal. The bell rang, signaling the end of class, and somehow I managed to pull myself together enough to make it through the rest of the day. That night at dinner, my father, Marcus, was telling us about his promotion at the engineering firm, while my mother, Sarah, nodded and asked all the right questions. My younger brother, Tyler, was focused on his phone, as usual. Everything seemed perfectly normal, except for the fact that I felt like I was watching the scene through glass, like I wasn't really there. "Jake, you're not eating," my mother noticed, glancing at my untouched plate of spaghetti. "I'm fine," I said automatically, twirling some pasta on my fork to prove the point. But I wasn't fine. Over the next 2 weeks, the episodes kept happening. Sometimes in the middle of class, sometimes while I was trying to fall asleep, sometimes for no reason at all while I was just sitting in my room. My heart would start pounding so hard I was sure everyone around me could hear it. My palms would get sweaty, my mouth would go dry, and this overwhelming sense of dread would wash over me like I was about to die or go crazy. I started avoiding places where it had happened before. I'd skip lunch and eat in the library instead of the cafeteria. I stopped hanging out with my friends Connor and Alex after school, making excuses about having too much homework. I even started taking longer routes to classes to avoid certain hallways where I'd had particularly bad episodes. The worst part was how unpredictable it all was. I'd be having a perfectly normal day, maybe even feeling good, and then boom, it would hit me like a freight train. I began to dread going to sleep because I never knew if I'd wake up feeling normal or if the crushing anxiety would be waiting for me the moment I opened my eyes. My grades started slipping. I'd been a straight-A student since middle school, but suddenly I couldn't concentrate during tests. My mind would go completely blank, or I'd get so focused on my heartbeat that I couldn't think about anything else. When I got a C+ on that chemistry test I'd studied so hard for, I knew I had to tell someone what was happening. I chose my father because he'd always been the problem solver in our family. When our car broke down, he fixed it. When the basement flooded 2 years ago, he handled everything with the insurance company and contractors. He was logical, practical, and always seemed to know what to do. I found him in his home office on a Saturday morning, reviewing some blueprints spread across his desk. The room smelled like coffee and that woody cologne he always wore. His reading glasses were perched on his nose, and there were papers scattered everywhere in what looked like chaos, but was actually his very organized system. "Dad," I knocked on the doorframe, "can I talk to you about something?" He looked up, and for a moment, I saw the same patient expression he'd had when I was little and needed help with homework. "Sure, buddy, what's going on?" I sat down in the chair across from his desk, the same one where I'd shown him report cards and talked about college plans. My hands were already starting to shake, which made me angry because I hadn't even begun explaining yet. "I think something's wrong with me," I started, my voice coming out smaller than I'd intended. "I've been having these episodes where I can't breathe and my heart starts racing and I feel like I'm going to pass out or die or something. His eyebrows furrowed slightly. When does this happen? Randomly, at school, at home, sometimes in the middle of the night. It's been going on for about 3 weeks now, and it's getting worse. I can barely concentrate on anything anymore. I watched his face carefully, hoping to see concern or understanding, but his expression was becoming more skeptical by the second. Are you sure you're not just stressed about college applications? Senior year is tough, Jake. Everyone feels overwhelmed. This isn't stress, Dad. This is different. Something is actually wrong with me. I looked it up online and I think I might be having panic attacks. That's when his expression shifted completely. The patience disappeared, replaced by something that looked almost like irritation. Jake, you're 17 years old. You don't have panic attacks. You're a healthy kid with no real problems. He took off his reading glasses and leaned back in his chair. You know what this sounds like to me? It sounds like you're looking for attention. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my chest tighten, which made me panic about having another episode right there in front of him, which made the whole thing worse. I'm not making this up, I said, hearing my voice crack. I wouldn't make something like this up. I'm not saying you're deliberately lying, he said, his tone becoming more clinical and distant. But sometimes when teenagers aren't getting enough attention at home, they unconsciously create drama to get people to focus on them. Your mother and I have been busy with work lately, and Tyler's been having those issues at school. Maybe you're feeling left out. I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. This was my father, the man who taught me how to ride a bike and helped me build a treehouse and always told me I could come to him with any problem. And now he was sitting there telling me that my suffering was just a bid for attention. I'm not feeling left out, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Something is actually happening to me. These episodes are real, they're scary, and they're affecting my schoolwork, and I need help. He put his glasses back on and looked down at his blueprints, clearly signaling that the conversation was over. Jake, you're going to be 18 in a few months. You need to start handling your problems like an adult instead of creating drama every time life gets a little challenging. I suggest you focus on your studies and stop reading medical websites that are just going to make you think you have diseases you don't have. I sat there for another few seconds, waiting for him to look back up at me, waiting for him to realize how much his words had hurt, waiting for him to take it back. But he just kept studying his papers like I wasn't even there anymore. When I finally left his office, I felt more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. Not only was I still dealing with these terrifying episodes that I didn't understand, but now I also knew that the one person I'd trusted most in the world thought I was just being dramatic and attention-seeking. That night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. I wasn't going to tell anyone else what was happening to me. If my own father thought I was making it up, then clearly I couldn't trust anyone with this. I would just have to figure out how to deal with it on my own. What I didn't know then was how much worse things were about to get, and how a complete stranger would eventually become the person who saved my life. The next 6 weeks were the darkest of my life. After my father's dismissal, I built walls around myself that felt impenetrable. I stopped talking to my family about anything meaningful, answering their questions with one-word responses, and retreating to my room the moment dinner was over. The panic attacks weren't just happening anymore, they were ruling my entire existence. I developed what I now know were avoidance behaviors, but at the time, they just felt like survival strategies. I mapped out every bathroom location in our school building. I started carrying a water bottle everywhere because my mouth would go dry during episodes. I even began timing my breathing during normal moments, convinced that if I could just control my breathing perfectly, I could prevent the attacks from coming. But the worst part wasn't the physical symptoms. It was the constant fear of the fear itself. I lived in terror of the next episode, which meant I was essentially having low-level anxiety 24 hours a day. I'd wake up each morning and immediately do a mental check. How do I feel? Is my heart beating normally? Are my hands steady? Any sign that an attack might be coming would send me into a tailspin. My best friend Connor started asking questions I couldn't answer. We've been friends since 5th grade, and he knew something was seriously wrong when I started canceling our weekend gaming sessions and avoiding him in the hallways. "Dude, what's your deal lately?" he asked one day after I'd made another excuse about why I couldn't hang out. We were standing by his locker, and the normal chaos of students rushing to class felt overwhelming to me. "You've been acting weird for like 2 months." I wanted so badly to tell him everything, to explain about the racing heart and the sweaty palms and the feeling like I was going to die. But my father's words echoed in my head. Attention-seeking. What if Connor thought the same thing? What if everyone did? "I'm just stressed about college stuff," I lied, the same excuse I'd been using with everyone. "My parents are putting a lot of pressure on me." Connor looked skeptical, but he didn't push it. "Okay, well, if you want to talk about anything, you know I'm here, right?" I nodded and walked away, hating myself for lying to him, but feeling like I had no other choice. My grades continued to plummet. I failed a calculus test completely, just handed in a blank paper because I'd spent the entire period convinced I was having a heart attack. When my teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, asked to speak with me after class, I was sure he was going to ask what was wrong. Instead, he just lectured me about applying myself and living up to my potential. "Jake, you're one of the smartest students I've taught, but smart only gets you so far if you don't put in the effort. Whatever's going on in your personal life, you can't let it derail your future." If only he knew that I was putting in more effort than ever. It was just all going toward trying not to fall apart in public. The breaking point came during a family dinner in late November. My mother had made pot roast, my father's favorite, and everyone was discussing Thanksgiving plans. My grandmother was coming to stay with us, and my mother was worried about whether she'd approve of the new dining room furniture. I was pushing food around on my plate, trying to look normal while internally monitoring my heart rate, when Tyler said something that cut through my defenses like a knife. "Maybe Jake can actually show up for Thanksgiving dinner instead of hiding in his room like some kind of hermit," he said, with that casual cruelty that only younger siblings can master. "Tyler, that's enough," my mother said automatically, but she was looking at me with concern. "Jake, you have been spending a lot of time alone lately. Is everything okay?" All eyes were on me, and suddenly the familiar tightness started building in my chest. My father was watching me with that same skeptical expression he'd worn in his office weeks earlier. This was it. Another episode was coming, and it was going to happen right here at the dinner table, in front of everyone. "I'm fine," I managed to say, but my voice sounded strained even to my own ears. "You don't look fine," my mother said gently. "You look pale. Are you feeling sick?" My heart was starting to race now, and my hands were beginning to tremble. I gripped my fork tighter, trying to hide it, but that only made me more aware of the shaking. "I said I'm fine," I repeated, more sharply this time. My father set down his fork with deliberate precision. "Jake, your mother is just trying to help. There's no need to be rude." The irony wasn't lost on me. He was criticizing my rudeness when he'd dismissed my cry for help as attention-seeking behavior just weeks earlier. The anger and frustration I'd been suppressing came bubbling up to the surface. "Help?" I said, my voice getting louder. "Like how you helped when I told you I was having panic attacks?" A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The silence that followed was deafening. Tyler stopped chewing. My mother looked confused, glancing between my father and me. My father's jaw tightened. "Jake," he said in a warning tone. But I couldn't stop now. Weeks of bottled-up fear and anger came pouring out. "No, Dad. You want to talk about being rude? How about when your son comes to you for help and you tell him he's just seeking attention?" My mother's face went white. "What are you talking about?" "Ask him," I said, standing up from the table so fast my chair nearly toppled over. "Ask him about how I told him I was having panic attacks, and he said I was just being dramatic because I wanted attention." My father stood up too, his face flushed with anger. "That's enough, Jake. You're being completely inappropriate." "Inappropriate? My voice cracked on the word. I'm 17 years old, and I feel like I'm dying multiple times a day, and asking for help is inappropriate? Marcus, my mother said quietly, is this true? Did Jake come to you about having panic attacks? For a moment, my father looked uncertain. Then his expression hardened. He came to me claiming he was having medical episodes, yes, but I explained to him that what he was describing sounded like normal teenage stress and that he needed to learn to handle challenges without creating drama. Creating drama? The words exploded out of me. You think I'm creating drama? You think I want to feel like this? My hands were shaking visibly now, and my breathing was becoming shallow. The full panic attack was starting, and there was no hiding it anymore. Jake, honey, sit down, my mother said, reaching toward me. No, I backed away from the table. I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend everything is fine when I feel like I'm going crazy, and the one person who's supposed to protect me thinks I'm lying. I ran upstairs to my room and slammed the door, collapsing on my bed as the panic attack hit with full force. Through the thin walls, I could hear raised voices downstairs, my parents arguing about something, though I couldn't make out the words. 20 minutes later, there was a soft knock on my door. Jake? It was my mother's voice. Can I come in? I didn't answer, but she came in anyway. She sat on the edge of my bed and didn't say anything for a long moment. I'm sorry, she finally said. I'm sorry I didn't know what was happening with you. I'm sorry your father didn't take you seriously. And I'm sorry we let you suffer alone for so long. I rolled over to face her, and she looked genuinely stricken. Mom, I don't know what's wrong with me. These attacks are real. They're not in my head, and I'm not making them up. I know, she said softly. I believe you, and we're going to get you help. The next morning, she made an appointment with Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a therapist who specialized in working with teenagers. The appointment was for the following week. I had no idea that this woman I'd never met would become the first person to truly see me, to validate my experience, and to use a word that would change everything. Hero. The waiting room of Dr. Rebecca Martinez's office felt nothing like what I'd expected. Instead of sterile white walls and uncomfortable chairs, it had warm beige paint, soft lighting, and furniture that actually looked comfortable. There were plants everywhere, real ones, not the fake plastic kind you see in most medical offices. The magazines on the coffee table weren't just generic health publications, but included everything from National Geographic to Rolling Stone. I sat there with my mother, both of us pretending to read while we waited. My appointment was at 3:30 p.m. on a Thursday, and I'd been excused from my last 2 classes. Part of me was grateful to miss advanced physics, where I'd been struggling to focus for weeks, but another part was terrified about what was going to happen in the next hour. Jake Patterson? A woman's voice called from a doorway across the room. Dr. Martinez was not what I'd pictured either. She looked to be in her 40s, with shoulder-length black hair and warm brown eyes behind stylish glasses. She was wearing dark jeans, ankle boots, and a soft gray cardigan, more like someone's cool aunt than a clinical therapist. When she smiled, it reached her eyes in a way that made me feel slightly less anxious. I'm Rebecca, she said, extending her hand to shake mine. It's nice to meet you, Jake. And you must be Sarah, she added, turning to my mother. Thank you both for coming in today. Her office was even more welcoming than the waiting room. 2 comfortable armchairs faced each other across a small space, with a couch along one wall and bookshelves filled with everything from psychology textbooks to novels. A small fountain bubbled quietly in one corner, and afternoon sunlight streamed through sheer curtains. Jake, I always like to start by explaining how I work, Dr. Martinez said once we were settled. My mother had chosen to sit on the couch while I took one of the armchairs across from Dr. Martinez. This is your space. You can talk about whatever you want, or we can sit in silence if that's what you need. There's no pressure to share anything you're not ready to discuss. I nodded, though I wasn't sure what to say. The whole situation felt surreal. Just 2 months ago, I'd been a normal high school senior, worried about college applications and weekend plans. Now I was sitting in a therapist's office because I couldn't make it through a day without feeling like I was dying. Your mom mentioned on the phone that you've been experiencing what sound like panic attacks. Can you tell me about that in your own words? The question was so different from my father's interrogation in his office. There was no skepticism in her voice, no suggestion that I might be exaggerating or seeking attention. Just genuine curiosity and what felt like real concern. I don't really know how to explain it, I started, surprised by how easy it felt to talk to her. It's like, 1 minute I'm fine, and then suddenly my heart starts racing and I can't breathe and I feel like something terrible is about to happen. But nothing actually is happening. I'll just be sitting in class or lying in bed and it hits me like a truck. She nodded, taking notes on a tablet. How long do these episodes typically last? Maybe 10 or 15 minutes, sometimes longer. And afterward, I feel exhausted, like I just ran a marathon or something. That sounds incredibly frightening, she said, and the validation in her voice almost made me cry. How often are you experiencing these episodes? Every day, sometimes multiple times a day. It's gotten to the point where I'm afraid to leave my house because I never know when it's going to happen next. Dr. Martinez set down her tablet and leaned forward slightly. Jake, what you're describing sounds exactly like panic disorder. It's a very real, very treatable condition that affects millions of people. You're not making this up, you're not being dramatic, and you're definitely not attention-seeking. The relief that washed over me at those words was overwhelming. For the first time in months, someone was telling me that what I was experiencing was legitimate. The episodes you're having are panic attacks, she continued. Your brain is essentially triggering your body's fight or flight response even when there's no actual danger present. It's like a smoke alarm going off when there's no fire. The alarm is working perfectly, it's just responding to something that isn't really a threat. But why is this happening to me? I asked. I had a normal life before this started. I was doing well in school, I had friends, everything was fine. Panic disorder can develop for lots of reasons, she explained. Sometimes it's genetic. Anxiety tends to run in families. Sometimes it's triggered by stress, major life changes, or even just the natural hormonal changes that happen during adolescence. The important thing to understand is that this isn't your fault. You didn't do anything wrong to cause this. We talked for another 30 minutes about my symptoms, my family situation, and how the panic attacks were affecting my daily life. Dr. Martinez asked detailed questions about when the episodes happened, what they felt like, and how I'd been coping. She never once looked at me like I was overreacting or being dramatic. Then she asked a question that caught me off guard. Jake, how did your family react when you first told them about these panic attacks? I hesitated, glancing at my mother on the couch. She gave me an encouraging nod. My dad didn't believe me, I said quietly. He said I was just seeking attention and that I needed to handle my problems like an adult. Dr. Martinez's expression darkened slightly. I'm sorry to hear that. That must have been incredibly hurtful, especially when you were already scared and vulnerable. It was, I admitted. It made me feel like maybe I really was just being dramatic, like maybe the attacks weren't as bad as I thought they were. Jake, look at me, she said, her voice becoming more intense. What your father said to you was wrong, completely, utterly wrong. When someone you love comes to you in crisis, the appropriate response is support and help, not dismissal and judgment. My mother shifted uncomfortably on the couch, and I could see tears in her eyes. But here's what I want you to understand, Dr. Martinez continued. The fact that you've been dealing with this on your own for months, going to school every day, trying to maintain your relationships, attempting to keep up with your responsibilities despite being in constant fear, that doesn't make you weak or attention-seeking. That makes you incredibly strong. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was filled with something that sounded almost like admiration. Jake, I've been doing this work for 15 years. I've worked with adults who've fallen apart completely after experiencing much less than what you've been going through. The fact that you're sitting here today, still fighting, still trying to get better despite being invalidated by someone you trusted, that doesn't make you a victim. That makes you a hero. The word hit me like a physical force. Hero. No one had ever called me that before. Throughout this entire nightmare, I'd felt weak, broken, like I was failing at the most basic task of being a functional human being. But here was this professional, this expert, telling me that my survival was actually an act of heroism. I know that might sound dramatic, she continued, but I mean it completely. Most people never have to face the kind of internal battle you've been fighting. Most people never have to wake up each day and choose to keep going despite feeling like their own mind is working against them. The courage it takes to do that, day after day, without support from the people who should have been helping you, that's extraordinary. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was filled with something that sounded almost like admiration. Jake, I've been doing this work for 15 years. I've worked with adults who've fallen apart completely after experiencing much less than what you've been going through. The fact that you're sitting here today, still fighting, still trying to get better despite being invalidated by someone you trusted, that doesn't make you a victim. That makes you a hero. The word hit me like a physical force. Hero. No one had ever called me that before. Throughout this entire nightmare, I'd felt weak, broken, like I was failing at the most basic task of being a functional human being. But here was this professional, this expert, telling me that my survival was actually an act of heroism. I know that might sound dramatic, she continued, but I mean it completely. Most people never have to face the kind of internal battle you've been fighting. Most people never have to wake up each day and choose to keep going despite feeling like their own mind is working against them. The courage it takes to do that day after day without support from the people who should have been helping you, that's extraordinary. I felt tears starting to form in my eyes, but for the first time in months, they weren't tears of fear or frustration. They were tears of relief, of recognition, of finally being seen for who I really was, rather than being dismissed as dramatic or attention-seeking. So here's what we're going to do, Dr. Martinez said, picking up her tablet again. We're going to work together to give you some tools to manage these panic attacks. We're going to help you understand what's happening in your brain and body when they occur, and we're going to make sure you never have to face this alone again. As we wrapped up the session and scheduled my next appointment, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. For the first time since this nightmare began, I believed that maybe, just maybe, I was going to be okay. Walking out to the car with my mother, I realized that Dr. Martinez had given me something even more valuable than a diagnosis or a treatment plan. She'd given me a new story about myself, one where I wasn't the problem, but rather the hero of my own survival. The drive home from Dr. Martinez's office was different from any car ride I'd taken with my mother in months. Instead of the usual awkward silence or forced small talk about school, we actually talked, really talked, for the first time since this whole nightmare had started. "I had no idea your father said those things to you," she said. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, and I could see the anger in her jaw. "Jake, I am so sorry. If I had known." "It's not your fault, Mom," I said, meaning it. "I should have told you sooner, but after Dad's reaction, I was afraid everyone would think the same thing." "Your father was wrong," she said firmly. "What he said was cruel and ignorant, and I'm going to make sure he understands that." When we got home, my father's car was already in the driveway. He usually didn't get back from the engineering firm until after 6, but it was only 4:45. I wondered if my mother had told him about the appointment. We walked into the house to find him sitting at the kitchen table, still in his work clothes but with his tie loosened. Tyler was nowhere to be seen, probably upstairs playing video games. The house felt tense in a way I'd become all too familiar with. "How did it go?" my father asked, directing the question to my mother rather than to me. "It went very well," she replied, setting her purse down on the counter. "Dr. Martinez confirmed that Jake has panic disorder. It's a legitimate medical condition, Marcus, not attention-seeking behavior. I watched my father's face carefully, looking for any sign of acknowledgement or remorse. Instead, his expression became defensive. "Look, I'm not a doctor," he said. "I was just trying to help him develop some resilience. Kids these days get therapy for everything instead of learning to tough it out." Tough it out? The anger in my mother's voice was unmistakable. Our son has been suffering for months, and your solution was to tell him to tough it out? "Sarah, you're being dramatic. I never said." "Yes, you did." My voice cut through their argument. Both of my parents turned to look at me. "Dad, you told me I was attention-seeking. You said I needed to handle my problems like an adult. You dismissed everything I was going through because it was inconvenient for you to deal with." "Jake, that's enough." "No, Dad. For once, you're going to listen to me. Dr. Martinez told me something today that I think you need to hear. She said that what I've been going through, going to school every day, trying to maintain my relationships, attempting to keep up with my responsibilities while dealing with constant panic attacks, that doesn't make you weak. It makes you strong." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was filled with something that sounded almost like admiration. "Jake, I've been doing this work for 15 years. I've worked with adults who've fallen apart completely after experiencing much less than what you've been going through. The fact that you're sitting here today, still fighting, still trying to get better despite being invalidated by someone you trusted, that doesn't make you a victim. That makes you a hero." The word hit me like a physical force. Hero. No one had ever called me that before. Throughout this entire nightmare, I'd felt weak, broken, like I was failing at the most basic task of being a functional human being. But here was this professional, this expert, telling me that my survival was actually an act of heroism. "I know that might sound dramatic," she continued, "but I mean it completely. Most people never have to face the kind of internal battle you've been fighting. Most people never have to wake up each day and choose to keep going despite feeling like their own mind is working against them. The courage it takes to do that, day after day, without support from the people who should have been helping you, that's extraordinary." I felt tears starting to form in my eyes, but for the first time in months, they weren't tears of fear or frustration. They were tears of relief, of recognition, of finally being seen for who I really was, rather than being dismissed as dramatic or attention-seeking. "So here's what we're going to do," Dr. Martinez said, picking up her tablet again. "We're going to work together to give you some tools to manage these panic attacks. We're going to help you understand what's happening in your brain and body when they occur, and we're going to make sure you never have to face this alone again." As we wrapped up the session and scheduled my next appointment, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. For the first time since this nightmare began, I believed that maybe, just maybe, I was going to be okay. Walking out to the car with my mother, I realized that Dr. Martinez had given me something even more valuable than a diagnosis or a treatment plan. She'd given me a new story about myself, one where I wasn't the problem, but rather the hero of my own survival. The drive home from Dr. Martinez's office was different from any car ride I'd taken with my mother in months. Instead of the usual awkward silence or forced small talk about school, we actually talked, really talked, for the first time since this whole nightmare had started. "Yes, because I've been fighting a battle you couldn't even see, let alone understand. And I've been doing it alone because the one person I trusted most in the world told me I was just seeking attention." The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. My mother was looking between my father and me with tears in her eyes. My father sat back down heavily in his chair. He started, then stopped. For the first time in my life, my father looked uncertain, vulnerable even. "I didn't know it was that serious." "That's because you didn't want to know," I said. "It was easier to dismiss me than to deal with the possibility that your son might actually need help." Over the next few weeks, everything began to change. I started seeing Dr. Martinez twice a week, and she taught me techniques I'd never heard of before. We worked on breathing exercises that actually helped during panic attacks, not the shallow, panicked breathing I'd been doing, but deep, controlled breaths that sent signals to my brain that I was safe. She introduced me to something called grounding techniques. During an episode, instead of fighting the panic, I learned to name 5 things I could see, 4 things I could touch, 3 things I could hear, 2 things I could smell, and 1 thing I could taste. It sounds simple, but it gave my racing mind something concrete to focus on instead of spiraling into catastrophic thoughts. We also talked about cognitive distortions, the way my brain had started interpreting normal physical sensations as signs of impending doom. When my heart rate increased slightly from walking upstairs, my anxiety-trained brain would immediately jump to, "I'm having a heart attack." Dr. Martinez helped me recognize these thought patterns and challenge them with logic. But perhaps most importantly, she helped me understand that recovery wasn't about never having another panic attack. It was about changing my relationship with anxiety itself. The goal isn't to eliminate anxiety completely, she explained during one of our sessions. Anxiety serves an important function. It keeps us safe in genuinely dangerous situations. The goal is to teach your brain the difference between real threats and false alarms. My grades started to improve gradually. Not overnight, I was still dealing with months of missed assignments and failed tests, but I could concentrate again. I could sit through an entire class period without constantly monitoring my heart rate. When I did feel anxiety building, I had tools to manage it instead of just enduring it in terror. My friendship with Connor began to heal too. One day after school, I finally told him everything. We were sitting in his basement playing video games when I put down my controller and just started talking. I told him about the panic attacks, about my father's reaction, about the therapy, all of it. "Dude," he said when I finished, "why didn't you tell me sooner? I could have helped. I mean, I don't know anything about panic attacks, but I could have just been there, you know?" "I was afraid you'd think I was being dramatic," I admitted. "Jake, you're one of the most level-headed people I know. If you said you were having panic attacks, I would have believed you immediately." He paused his game and looked at me seriously. "I'm sorry I didn't push harder when I could see something was wrong. I should have been a better friend." The conversation with Connor made me realize how much damage my father's initial reaction had done. It hadn't just made me doubt myself, it had made me doubt everyone else's capacity for understanding and compassion. My relationship with my father was more complicated to repair. He never explicitly apologized for calling my panic attacks attention-seeking, but his behavior began to change slowly. He started asking how my therapy sessions went. When I had a panic attack during a family dinner one evening, instead of telling me to calm down, he actually helped me through the grounding technique Dr. Martinez had taught me. "5 things you can see," he said quietly, sitting beside me as I struggled to catch my breath. "The salt shaker, your watch, Mom's earrings, Tyler's phone, the plant on the windowsill," I managed to say. "Good, 4 things you can touch." It wasn't the same as an apology, but it was progress. It was him finally meeting me where I was instead of where he thought I should be. 3 months after that first appointment with Dr. Martinez, I had what she called a breakthrough moment. I was taking a test in AP Literature when I felt the familiar tightness beginning in my chest. My old self would have panicked about panicking, creating a spiral that would have sent me running from the classroom. Instead, I took a deep breath, acknowledged the sensation without judgment, and continued working on my essay about symbolism in The Great Gatsby. The tightness faded within a minute, I finished the test, and received a B+, my first solid grade in months. Walking out of that classroom, I realized that Dr. Martinez had been right from the very beginning. I wasn't the victim of my anxiety. I was the hero of my own recovery story. And for the first time in months, that felt like a story worth telling. By spring semester of my senior year, something unexpected started happening. Other students began approaching me, not about homework or weekend plans, but about anxiety. Word had somehow gotten around that I was seeing a therapist, and instead of the judgment I'd feared, I found myself becoming an unofficial resource for classmates dealing with their own struggles. It started with Emma Richardson, a girl from my AP history class who'd always seemed to have it all together. She was student body vice president, captain of the debate team, and had already been accepted to 3 Ivy League schools. One day after class, she lingered by my desk until the room cleared out.
Jake, can I ask you something kind of personal? She said, glancing around to make sure we were alone. Sure, I replied, packing up my notes on the Industrial Revolution. I heard you've been working with a therapist about anxiety stuff. Her usual confident demeanor was gone, replaced by something that looked almost fragile. I've been having these episodes where I can't sleep and my mind races, and I feel like I'm going to throw up. My parents think it's just senior year stress, but it feels like more than that. I recognized the look in her eyes immediately, the same mixture of fear and shame I'd carried for months before getting help. Emma, that sounds like it could be anxiety. Have you thought about talking to someone professional about it? My dad's a surgeon, she said quietly. He thinks therapy is for people who can't handle their problems on their own. He keeps telling me to just push through it and focus on graduation. The parallel to my own father's initial reaction was striking. Emma, that's exactly what my dad said to me, and it made everything so much worse because I felt like I had to suffer in silence. Over the next 20 minutes, I shared parts of my story: the panic attacks, the isolation, my father's dismissive reaction, and how Dr. Martinez had helped me understand that seeking help was actually a sign of strength, not weakness. You called your therapist Dr. Martinez? Would it be weird if I asked for her contact information? 2 weeks later, Emma texted me to say she'd had her first appointment and that Dr. Martinez had diagnosed her with generalized anxiety disorder. She said the same thing to me that she said to you, Emma wrote, that dealing with this while maintaining everything else makes me strong, not weak. Thank you for helping me see that. The ripple effect continued throughout the spring. Marcus Webb, a guy from my calculus class, approached me about panic attacks he'd been having before wrestling matches. Jessica Torres from student government confided that she'd been struggling with social anxiety that was affecting her ability to give speeches. Even Tyler's friend Brandon started asking me questions about anxiety after witnessing one of my managed panic attacks during a family barbecue.
Each conversation reminded me of something Dr. Martinez had told me during one of our sessions. Sometimes the people who've walked through the darkest valleys are the best equipped to help others find their way out. But the most significant change happened with my family, particularly with my father. The transformation was gradual and often subtle, but it was real. One evening in late March, he knocked on my bedroom door while I was working on college application essays. "Jake, do you have a minute?" he asked, standing awkwardly in my doorway. "Sure, come in," I said, closing my laptop. He sat on the edge of my bed, looking more uncomfortable than I'd ever seen him. "I've been doing some reading," he said, finally, "about anxiety disorders, about panic attacks." This was not what I'd expected him to say. "Oh, okay." "I found some articles online, and I talked to my brother Kevin about it. You know, he's been seeing a counselor since his divorce." I hadn't known that. Uncle Kevin had always seemed like the type of person who had everything figured out. He told me some things about what therapy has been like for him, about how asking for help was the hardest thing he'd ever done, but also the most important. My father was looking at his hands rather than at me. "I think I owe you an apology, son." The words hung in the air between us. I'd imagined this conversation hundreds of times over the past months, but now that it was actually happening, I wasn't sure how to respond. "When you came to me for help, I failed you," he continued. "I let my own ideas about toughness and self-reliance get in the way of being the father you needed. I was scared that if I acknowledged what you were going through, it would somehow make it worse or make you weak. But I understand now that ignoring a problem doesn't make it go away. It just makes the person suffering feel more alone." "Dad," I started, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish. I've been proud of you your whole life, Jake. Your grades, your character, the way you treat people. But I've never been more proud of you than I am right now, watching how you've handled this whole situation. The courage it took to keep going when you felt like your world was falling apart, the strength to ask for help even after I let you down. That's not weakness. That's the kind of man I hope I raised you to be." For the second time in months, I felt tears in my eyes. But these were different from the tears I'd cried in Dr. Martinez's office. These were tears of reconciliation, of a relationship that had been broken but was slowly being rebuilt. "I forgive you, Dad," I said, and I meant it. I know you were trying to help in the only way you knew how. He nodded, still looking emotional. "I'm going to do better. And I want you to know that if you ever need anything at all, you can come to me. No judgment, no dismissal, just support." The conversation lasted another hour. He asked detailed questions about my therapy sessions, about the techniques I'd learned, about how the family could better support my ongoing recovery. He even admitted that he'd been having his own struggles with work stress and was considering talking to someone himself. Around the same time, an opportunity arose that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. Our school's guidance counselor, Mrs. Peterson, asked if I'd be willing to speak at a mental health awareness assembly they were planning for May. The idea was to have students share their experiences to help reduce stigma and encourage others to seek help. My first instinct was to say no. Standing in front of the entire student body and talking about my panic attacks felt terrifying. But then I thought about Emma, about Marcus, about Jessica, about all the conversations I'd had with classmates who were struggling in silence, just like I had. I told Mrs. Peterson I'd do it, but only if I could have Dr. Martinez review my speech first. She thought that was an excellent idea. The night before the assembly, I was more nervous than I'd been since my worst panic attacks. But it was a different kind of nervousness. Not the paralyzing fear of something terrible happening, but the healthy anxiety that comes with doing something important and challenging. Dr. Martinez had helped me understand the difference. Good anxiety motivates us to prepare, to care about outcomes, to rise to meet challenges, she'd explained. Bad anxiety tells us we're in danger when we're not, that we can't handle things we actually can. Learning to distinguish between the two is a huge part of recovery. As I sat in the auditorium the next morning, waiting for my turn to speak, I thought about how much had changed since that first panic attack in Mrs. Patterson's chemistry class. I was still the same person, but I was also completely different. I'd learned that asking for help wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. I'd discovered that surviving something difficult didn't make you broken, it made you experienced. And most importantly, I'd come to understand that sometimes the worst experiences in our lives can become the foundation for helping others. When Mrs. Peterson called my name, I walked up to the podium with steady steps and clear purpose. Looking out at the sea of faces, some curious, some skeptical, some that I recognized as belonging to students who'd quietly confided their own struggles to me, I felt ready to share my story not as a victim, but as someone who'd found his way through the darkness and wanted to help others do the same. Standing at that podium, looking out at over 400 students and faculty members, I felt a familiar flutter in my chest. But instead of spiraling into panic, I recognized it for what it was: normal nervousness before an important moment. I took a deep breath, the way Dr. Martinez had taught me, and began. "6 months ago, I thought I was losing my mind," I said into the microphone. "I was having what I now know were panic attacks, but at the time, they felt like I was dying. My heart would race, I couldn't breathe, and I was convinced something catastrophic was about to happen. The worst part wasn't the physical symptoms, it was the isolation. I felt completely alone with something I didn't understand and couldn't control. I could see some students shifting uncomfortably in their seats, probably recognizing their own experiences in my words. In the front row, I spotted Emma Richardson giving me an encouraging nod. When I finally worked up the courage to tell my father what was happening, he told me I was just seeking attention, that I needed to toughen up and handle my problems like an adult. Those words almost destroyed me, not because they were mean, but because they came from someone I trusted completely. If my own dad didn't believe me, how could I trust anyone else? I saw several teachers exchanging glances, and I wondered if they were thinking about students who'd tried to confide in them over the years. But here's what I learned through therapy. And yes, I'm in therapy, and I'm not ashamed of that. Mental health struggles don't make you weak or attention-seeking or dramatic. They make you human. And seeking help for them doesn't make you a failure. It makes you brave. The auditorium was completely silent now. Even the usual shuffling and whispering had stopped. My therapist, Dr. Martinez, told me something that changed my entire perspective. She said that getting through each day while dealing with panic attacks, continuing to go to school, trying to maintain relationships, that didn't make you a victim. That made you a hero. Not because I was special or different, but because I was fighting a battle most people couldn't see, and I kept fighting even when it felt impossible. I paused, scanning the crowd. I could see Mrs. Peterson in the wings wiping her eyes. Principal Johnson was leaning forward intently. But most importantly, I could see students, my peers, really listening. I'm sharing this with you today because I know I'm not the only one in this room who's struggling. Since word got out that I was dealing with anxiety, I've had dozens of conversations with classmates who are going through similar things. Depression, panic attacks, social anxiety, eating disorders. Mental health challenges are everywhere, but we don't talk about them because we're afraid of being judged or dismissed. I looked directly at Marcus Webb, who'd confided in me about his pre-wrestling panic attacks. He was sitting with his teammates, looking nervous but determined. The stigma around mental health doesn't just hurt the people who are struggling, it hurts all of us. When we create environments where people are afraid to ask for help, we lose the opportunity to support each other. We miss the chance to learn from each other's experiences. We stay isolated when we could be connected. My voice was getting stronger now, more passionate. This wasn't just a speech anymore. It was something I truly believed in. I want to be clear about something. Getting help for mental health issues isn't a sign that you're not tough enough for the real world. It's preparation for the real world. Learning to recognize your triggers, developing coping strategies, understanding how your mind works under stress, these are life skills that will serve you forever. I could see some parents in the back rows. The assembly was open to families, and I wondered what they were thinking. Were any of them recognizing themselves in the description of my father's initial reaction? If you're struggling with something right now, please know that you're not alone. It might feel like you're the only person who can't handle the pressure, but mental health challenges affect 1 in 4 people. That means, in this auditorium right now, there are about 100 students and adults dealing with anxiety, depression, or other mental health conditions. The number seemed to surprise people. I could see heads turning, students looking around at their classmates with new awareness. And if you're not struggling right now, please remember that mental health is like physical health. Just because you're not sick today doesn't mean you'll never need medical attention. Be kind to the people around you. Listen when someone trusts you with their struggles. Don't dismiss their experiences just because you haven't had the same ones. I thought about my father and how his perspective had changed over these past months. People could learn. People could grow. Finally, I want to address something specifically for the adults in this room: parents, teachers, coaches, mentors. When a young person comes to you with mental health concerns, please take them seriously. Even if their problems seem small to you, even if you think they should be able to handle it on their own, even if you're worried that acknowledging their struggles will somehow make them worse, please listen. Please help them get professional support. Please don't let them face these challenges alone. My voice cracked slightly on that last sentence, thinking about those weeks of isolation after my father's dismissal. The path to mental wellness isn't about becoming a different person or fixing what's wrong with you. It's about learning to work with your mind instead of against it. It's about building a toolkit of strategies for difficult moments. Most importantly, it's about understanding that you are not defined by your mental health struggles. You are someone who happens to be dealing with mental health struggles. There's a huge difference. I could see Dr. Martinez in the audience now. Mrs. Peterson had invited her to attend, and she'd driven over from her office to support me. She was smiling with what looked like pride. 6 months ago, I felt broken, ashamed, and completely alone. Today, I feel strong, grateful, and connected to an entire community of people who understand that mental health is just health. The difference wasn't that my problems went away. I still have anxiety. I still sometimes have panic attacks. The difference is that I now have tools to manage them, people to support me, and most importantly, I have a story that might help someone else feel less alone in theirs. I looked out at the sea of faces one more time, seeing my classmates not as judges, but as fellow human beings, each carrying their own invisible struggles and victories. Mental health challenges don't make you weak. Asking for help doesn't make you a burden. And sharing your story doesn't make you attention-seeking. It makes you generous. Thank you for listening to me. The applause started slowly, then built to something that felt less like polite appreciation and more like genuine recognition.
As I walked off the stage, I was immediately surrounded by students and teachers wanting to talk, to share their own experiences, to ask questions. Mrs. Peterson grabbed my arm as I passed. "Jake, that was extraordinary. I've never seen the auditorium so quiet during a student presentation." But the moment that meant the most came 20 minutes later as the crowd was dispersing. A sophomore girl I didn't recognize approached me hesitantly. "Excuse me, are you Jake?" she asked quietly. "Yeah, that's me." "I'm Sophia Martinez, no relation to your therapist," she said with a small smile. "I just wanted to say thank you. I've been having panic attacks for 3 months, and my parents keep telling me it's just stress about high school being harder than middle school. But listening to you, I think I need real help." "Sophia, you absolutely deserve real help," I said. "Would you like Dr. Martinez's contact information?" As I wrote down the phone number, I realized this was why I'd felt compelled to speak today. Not for the recognition or the applause, but for moments like this, when sharing your story helps someone else feel less alone in theirs. Walking to my car with my parents afterward, my father put his hand on my shoulder. "I'm proud of you, son, not just for what you said up there, but for who you've become through all of this." I looked back at the school building, thinking about how much had changed since those first terrifying panic attacks in Mrs. Patterson's classroom. I was still Jake Patterson, still a senior worried about college and the future, but I was also someone who'd learned that our struggles don't define our limitations, they reveal our capacity for growth, resilience, and connection. Most importantly, I'd learned that sometimes the thing that feels like it's breaking you is actually the thing that's making you stronger. And sometimes the story you're most afraid to tell is exactly the story someone else needs to hear. 3 weeks after the assembly, I was sitting in Dr. Martinez's office for what had become our monthly check-in sessions. The twice-weekly appointments had gradually decreased as I developed stronger coping mechanisms, but we both agreed that regular maintenance sessions were important for my continued progress. "I've been getting calls," she said with a smile as we settled into our usual chairs. "A lot of calls. Apparently, word is spreading beyond your school about a certain very articulate young man who gave a powerful speech about mental health." She was right. The ripple effects from the assembly had extended far beyond what I'd anticipated. Mrs. Peterson had recorded my speech and, with my consent, shared it with other schools in the district. Local news had picked up the story. I'd even been invited to speak at 2 other high schools and a community college. "How does that make you feel?" she asked, using one of her favorite therapeutic questions. "Honestly, a little overwhelmed sometimes," I admitted, "but also purposeful, I guess. Like everything I went through wasn't just random suffering, it was preparation for something bigger." That's a very mature perspective, Jake, and it speaks to how far you've come in reframing your narrative. She was right about that, too. The story I told myself about my life had fundamentally changed. Instead of "I'm broken and weak," it had become "I faced significant challenges and developed strength through overcoming them." Instead of "I'm different and alone," it was now "I'm part of a community of people who understand that mental health struggles are part of the human experience." "I want to show you something," Dr. Martinez said, reaching for a folder on her desk. "I've started keeping track of the students who've come to see me after your speech. Obviously, I can't share any details because of confidentiality, but I can tell you this. In the 3 weeks since your assembly, I've had 17 new referrals from your school district alone." The number took my breath away. 17?
17 young people who might have continued suffering in silence if you hadn't had the courage to share your story. That's 17 families who are getting the support they need. That's potentially 17 lives changed for the better. I thought about Sophia Martinez, the sophomore who'd approached me after my speech. She'd started seeing Dr. Martinez the following week and had already texted me to say how much better she was feeling just from having her experiences validated by a professional. "There's something else," Dr. Martinez continued. "I got a call yesterday from a man named Marcus Patterson. He said he was your father." My eyebrows shot up in surprise. "My dad called you?" "He did. He wanted to schedule an appointment for himself. He said he'd realized through your journey that he had some of his own issues to work through, particularly around emotional expression and asking for help. He specifically mentioned that he didn't want to pass those limitations on to your brother Tyler." The image of my father sitting in this same chair, doing the work of therapy, was almost surreal, but it also felt like the natural next step in our family's healing process. He also wanted me to know, she continued, that he considers your recovery to be one of the most important things he's ever witnessed. He said watching you transform your struggle into a way to help others has taught him more about courage and strength than anything else in his life. I felt tears prick my eyes, but they were tears of gratitude rather than pain. As spring turned into summer and my high school graduation approached, I found myself reflecting on the year that had changed everything. The panic attacks hadn't disappeared completely. I still had episodes occasionally, but they no longer controlled my life. More importantly, they no longer defined my sense of self. I'd been accepted to Northwestern University, where I planned to study psychology with a focus on adolescent mental health. The career path hadn't been in my plans a year earlier, but my experiences had shown me where my passion and purpose intersected. The night before graduation, my family gathered for dinner at my favorite restaurant. It was the first time in months that we'd all been together without the underlying tension that had characterized our interactions during my worst period. "I want to make a toast," my father said, raising his glass of wine, "to Jake, who taught our entire family what real strength looks like." "To Jake," my mother and Tyler echoed, and we clinked our passes together. "Actually," I said, "I want to make a toast too. To Dr. Martinez, who saw me as a hero when I couldn't see myself as anything but broken. To Mom, who stepped up when I needed an advocate. To Tyler, who gave me space to heal without making me feel like a burden. And to Dad, who showed me that people can change, grow, and learn to be better than they were before." My father's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, son, for giving me the chance to be the father you deserved." Graduation day itself was surreal. Walking across that stage to receive my diploma, I thought about how different I felt from the terrified 17-year-old who'd had his first panic attack in chemistry class. I was still the same person, but I was also completely transformed. After the ceremony, as families took pictures and celebrated, I was approached by Principal Johnson. "Jake, I wanted to let you know that we're implementing a new mental health program at the school next year, partly inspired by your assembly. We're hiring a full-time counselor and creating peer support groups for students dealing with anxiety and depression." "That's incredible," I said, genuinely excited about the impact this could have on future students. "We'd like to name the program after you, if you're comfortable with that. The Jake Patterson Mental Health Initiative." I was honored, but something about it didn't feel right. "Actually, Mr. Johnson, could we call it something else? Maybe the Speak Up Initiative or the You're Not Alone program. I want it to be about the message, not about me." He smiled. "That's exactly why we wanted to honor you in the first place, your humility and focus on helping others rather than seeking recognition." That summer, before leaving for Northwestern, I spent time volunteering with a local mental health nonprofit. I facilitated support groups for teenagers dealing with anxiety and panic disorders, drawing on both my personal experience and the techniques I'd learned in therapy. One evening, I was leading a group session when a 16-year-old named David shared his story. His father had called his panic attacks attention-seeking behavior and told him to man up instead of seeking help. "I know exactly how that feels," I told him, "and I want you to know that your father's reaction says nothing about the validity of your experience. Sometimes the people we love most have their own limitations that prevent them from giving us what we need, but that doesn't mean we're wrong for needing it." After the session, David approached me. "Thanks for sharing that. I was starting to think maybe my dad was right. Maybe I am just being dramatic." "David, the fact that you're here, that you're working on getting better, that you're sharing your experience with others who understand, that's not dramatic. That's heroic." I could hear Dr. Martinez's words in my own voice, and I realized that the healing cycle was complete. I had received help, accepted it, grown from it, and was now passing it forward to others. As I prepared to leave for college, I had one final session with Dr. Martinez. We'd been working together for almost a year, and she'd become not just my therapist, but one of the most important people in my life. "You know," she said as our session wrapped up, "when I first met you, I could see your potential. You were in a crisis, but there was something about your resilience, your willingness to do the work, that told me you were going to be okay."
I didn't feel resilient back then, I said. That's the thing about resilience. We often don't recognize it in ourselves until we look back and see what we've survived, what we've overcome, how we've grown. She paused, looking thoughtful. Jake, I want you to remember something as you go off to college and start this new chapter. Your mental health journey didn't end with recovery. It evolved into purpose. But that doesn't mean you have to carry the weight of everyone else's healing. Take care of yourself first, always. I will, I promised. And Dr. Martinez, thank you for seeing me as a hero when I couldn't see myself as anything but broken, for believing in my strength when I felt completely powerless, for teaching me that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Thank you, Jake, for reminding me why I love this work, for showing me that sometimes the people who walk through the darkest valleys really do become the best guides for others. As I left her office for the last time as a regular patient, I thought about the journey that had brought me there. From that first panic attack to standing on a stage sharing my story, from feeling broken and alone to helping others feel seen and understood.
I'd learned that mental health isn't about being fixed or normal, it's about being equipped. It's about having the tools, support, and self-awareness to navigate life's challenges without being overwhelmed by them. Most importantly, I discovered that our struggles don't make us weak. They reveal our capacity for growth. Our wounds don't define our limitations. They become sources of wisdom we can share with others walking similar paths. 6 months later, I got a text message that made everything come full circle. It was from Sophia Martinez, the sophomore who'd approached me after my assembly. Jake, I wanted you to know that I gave my first speech about mental health at our school today. I told them what you told me, that seeking help doesn't make you weak, it makes you wise. Thank you for showing me that my story could help someone else feel less alone. Reading her message, I understood something profound about healing and hope. It's not a destination you reach, but a gift you pass forward. Every person who finds the courage to share their story, seek help, or support someone else creates ripples that extend far beyond what they can see. And sometimes, the thing that once felt like it was breaking you becomes the very thing that helps you heal others. The panic attacks that had once made me feel powerless had ultimately given me purpose. The struggle that had isolated me had become a bridge to connect with others. The crisis that had felt like an ending had actually been a beginning. That's the thing about being human. We're all walking each other home, sharing our stories, offering our strength, and reminding each other that none of us has to face our struggles alone. And sometimes, being called a hero isn't about saving the world. Sometimes, it's about having the courage to save yourself, and then showing others that they can do the same. My freshman year at Northwestern was both exhilarating and challenging in ways I hadn't expected. Living away from home for the first time, managing a demanding academic schedule, and navigating new social dynamics, all of these normal college stressors had the potential to trigger my anxiety in ways I hadn't experienced since my worst days in high school. But I was no longer the same person who had felt helpless in the face of panic. During my first week on campus, when I felt that familiar tightness in my chest during a particularly overwhelming orientation event, I excused myself, found a quiet corner, and used my grounding techniques. 5 things I could see: the brick wall, a student's bright yellow backpack, a coffee cup, an orientation banner, a tree outside the window. The technique worked just as well in college as it had in high school. My roommate, a pre-med student named Alex Chen, noticed my structured approach to stress management and asked about it one evening while we were both studying for midterms. "You always seem so calm during exams," he said, looking up from his organic chemistry textbook. "I'm over here having minor panic attacks about every test, and you're just steady. How do you do that?" I explained my history with anxiety and panic disorder, along with the techniques I'd learned in therapy. Alex listened intently, then surprised me by sharing his own struggles with perfectionism and the intense pressure he felt to meet his parents' expectations for medical school. "My parents immigrated here and sacrificed everything for my education," he said. "I feel like if I don't get perfect grades, I'm letting them down and wasting their sacrifice. But the pressure is killing me. I barely sleep, and I'm constantly anxious about not being good enough." We talked until 3 in the morning that night, and by the end of our conversation, Alex had agreed to visit the campus counseling center. 2 weeks later, he told me it was the best decision he'd ever made. The counselor helped me realize that honoring my parents' sacrifice doesn't mean destroying myself with impossible standards, he explained. I can work hard and be grateful without making my mental health the price of success. Word spread, as it tends to do in college dormitories. Soon, I was having regular conversations with other students about mental health, anxiety, and the importance of seeking help. My RA, Jessica Williams, approached me about co-facilitating a monthly discussion group for students dealing with stress and anxiety. We've never had a student volunteer who has both personal experience and such a natural ability to help others feel comfortable, she told me. Would you be interested in making this more formal? The discussion group grew from 5 students in our first meeting to over 20 by the end of the semester. We met in the common room every other Wednesday evening, creating a safe space where students could share their struggles without judgment and learn coping strategies from each other. One of our regular attendees was Maria Rodriguez, a junior studying engineering who'd been dealing with social anxiety that was affecting her ability to participate in class discussions and group projects. I know the answers, she told the group during one session. I study harder than anyone else in my classes, but when the professor calls on me, my mind goes blank and I can't speak. My classmates probably think I'm stupid, but really, I'm just terrified of saying the wrong thing and being judged. Over several weeks, we worked together on techniques for managing social anxiety. I shared strategies I'd learned from Dr. Martinez, while other group members offered their own insights and experiences. Maria gradually became more confident, not just in our group, but in her academic life as well. By the end of my sophomore year, she'd landed a competitive internship at a major tech company, something she never would have applied for before working on her social anxiety. Jake, I need you to know something, she told me during our last group meeting before summer break. When I first came to college, I was convinced I'd chosen the wrong major because I couldn't handle the social aspects of engineering. You helped me realize that my anxiety wasn't a limitation. It was just something I needed to learn to manage. Now I'm excited about my career instead of terrified of it. During my junior year, something unexpected happened that would shape my future in ways I couldn't have imagined. Dr. Martinez reached out to me through email with an unusual request. Jake, I hope college is treating you well. I'm writing because I've been asked to contribute a chapter to a book about adolescent mental health, specifically focusing on the importance of peer support and advocacy. Would you be interested in co-authoring this chapter with me? I think your perspective as someone who's lived this experience would add tremendous value. The opportunity to contribute to academic literature felt both exciting and daunting. Over the next 6 months, Dr. Martinez and I worked together on a chapter titled From Crisis to Advocacy, The Transformative Power of Peer Support in Adolescent Mental Health Recovery. Writing about my experiences from an academic perspective forced me to analyze my journey in new ways. I had to research the broader context of adolescent anxiety disorders, examine the role of family dynamics in mental health outcomes, and explore the psychological mechanisms behind why peer support is so effective. The process was therapeutic in unexpected ways. Looking back at my darkest moments through the lens of psychological research helped me understand that my experience, while deeply personal, was part of larger patterns that affected millions of young people. You know what strikes me most about your story, Jake? Dr. Martinez said during one of our writing sessions. It's not just that you recovered from panic disorder. It's that you transformed your relationship with vulnerability itself. You went from seeing your need for help as shameful to seeing your willingness to seek help as courageous. Our chapter was accepted for publication in a book called Breakthrough Approaches to Adolescent Mental Health, which would be used in graduate psychology programs across the country. Seeing my name next to Dr. Martinez on an academic publication felt like validation of how far I'd come, not just in my personal recovery, but in my ability to contribute meaningfully to the field I hope to enter professionally. During my senior year, I completed my honors thesis on the effectiveness of peer-led support groups for college students with anxiety disorders. I'd been collecting data from our campus discussion group for 2 years, with participants' consent, measuring changes in anxiety levels, academic performance, and overall well-being. The results were striking. Students who participated regularly in peer support groups showed significant improvements across all measures, with the most dramatic changes occurring in their sense of self-efficacy and their willingness to seek professional help when needed. My thesis advisor, Dr. Rebecca Kim, was impressed enough to encourage me to present my findings at a national conference on college mental health. Jake, this research has real implications for how universities approach student mental health support, she told me. You've demonstrated that peer-led interventions can be just as effective as professionally led groups for certain populations, and significantly more cost-effective to implement. The conference presentation was nerve-wracking in a completely different way from my high school assembly. This was an audience of mental health professionals, researchers, and university administrators, people who would evaluate my work on its academic merit rather than its emotional impact. But as I stood at the podium, looking out at an audience of experts, I realized that my unique perspective as both a researcher and someone with lived experience gave me credibility that couldn't be gained from textbooks alone. The traditional model of mental health support assumes that help flows from professional to client, I began, but what we've learned from peer support research is that healing often happens most effectively when it flows between people who share common experiences, regardless of their professional credentials. The presentation was well received, with several audience members approaching me afterward to discuss potential research collaborations and graduate school opportunities. One conversation in particular stood out. Dr. Michael Santos from the University of California at San Francisco introduced himself after my presentation. I've been running a research lab focused on innovative interventions for anxiety disorders in young adults, he said. We're particularly interested in the role of peer support and community-based approaches. Would you be interested in discussing PhD opportunities in our program? The idea of pursuing a doctorate had been on my mind, but hearing it from someone whose work I'd been following felt like confirmation that I was on the right path. As my college graduation approached, I reflected on the 4 years that had transformed me from a high school student recovering from panic disorder into someone preparing for graduate school in clinical psychology. The night before graduation, my family came to visit, including my father, whose own therapy journey had led to remarkable changes in how he approached emotional conversations. "Son, I want you to know how proud I am of the man you've become," he said, as we walked across campus together. "But I'm even more grateful for how much you've taught our entire family about what it means to support each other through difficult times." He paused by the building where I'd held so many peer support group meetings. "I used to think that showing emotion or asking for help was a weakness," he continued, "but watching you turn your struggles into a way to help others, seeing how your vulnerability became your strength, it changed everything I thought I knew about what makes someone strong." My mother, walking beside us, added, "Jake, your journey hasn't just helped you heal, it's helped all of us become better versions of ourselves." Tyler, now a senior in high school himself, had grown into someone far more emotionally aware than I'd been at his age. He'd actually started a mental health awareness club at his school, inspired by what he'd witnessed in our family. "I've never told you this," Tyler said, "but watching you go through everything, seeing how you handled it, it made me realize that if I ever struggle with something like that, it's okay to ask for help. You showed me that getting help isn't giving up, it's growing up." At graduation, I was recognized not just for academic achievement, but also for my contributions to campus mental health initiatives. The peer support program I'd helped develop was being expanded and formalized as part of the university's standard student services. But the moment that meant the most came during the reception afterward. A freshman named David Kim, no relation to my thesis advisor, approached me nervously. "Excuse me, are you Jake Patterson, the one who ran the anxiety support group?" "Yes, that's me. How can I help you?" "I wanted to thank you. I came to your group during my first semester when I was having panic attacks and considering dropping out. The way you talked about anxiety as something manageable rather than something that defines you, it changed everything for me." He paused, looking emotional. "I just finished my freshman year with a 3.8 GPA, and I'm planning to major in social work because I want to help other students the way you helped me." Standing there in my cap and gown, listening to David's story, I understood something profound about the nature of healing and purpose. Recovery isn't a destination you reach, it's a foundation you build for yourself and others.
6 years had passed since that first panic attack in Mrs. Patterson's chemistry class. The terrified, isolated teenager who thought he was losing his mind had become a college graduate heading to PhD school, but more importantly, he'd become someone who understood that our greatest struggles often become our most meaningful contributions. As I prepared to move to San Francisco for graduate school, I carried with me not just the knowledge I'd gained from textbooks and research, but the wisdom that comes from living through crisis and finding purpose on the other side. The panic attacks still occasionally visited, but they no longer terrified me. I had tools, support, and most importantly, a deep understanding that experiencing mental health challenges doesn't make you broken, it makes you human. And sometimes, being human in a world that often discourages vulnerability is the most heroic thing you can be. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.